Good morning. Well, this one landed in my inbox and I couldn't quite believe it when I read it. And I figured I'd share it with you. So this has come from a blog website and it's a story about a ferry. So sit back whilst I explain this to you. This is how Schleswig-Holstein sold their reliable diesel ferry for a song, spent 3.3 million euros for a new emissions-free solar ferry that doesn't work, and increased carbon emissions on top of it all. Net zero is indeed the gift that keeps on giving. For this tale, we must go to Schleswig-Holstein, that northern land of bays, fjords, cliffs, islands and stiff breezes just south of the Danish border. Specifically, we must travel to Missunde, a small town on the Schwanzen Peninsula. Again, I apologise for my pronunciation. Missunde is right next to another town called Brodersby on the opposing Anglen Peninsula. Between Brodersby on one hand and Missunde on the other hand is the Schlei, which you might mistake for a river, but it's actually an inlet of the Baltic Sea. To travel from Missunde to Brodersby, or from Brodersby to Missunde, you need to take an automobile ferry, car ferry. Since 2003, the Missunde 2 has been this ferry. She is a cheerful, diesel-driven craft, and every year she brings around 120,000 cars and 50,000 bicycles safely and reliably across the waters of the inlet. And there was nothing wrong with the Missunde 2, except that she ran on diesel, which, as we know, is an evil fuel destined to destroy the world, and that her diesel engines made noise as diesel engines do. Thus, the bureaucrats of the State Office for Coastal Protection decided some years ago to replace the old and reliable Missunde 2 with a newer, silent and more environmentally friendly solar-powered ferry, to be named Missunde 3. Their decision was entirely typical. The Office for Coastal Protection is subordinate to the Environmental Ministry of Schleswig-Holstein, and the Environmental Ministry is in the hands of an extremely bald man named Tobias Goldschmidt, who likes to talk about how he will make Schleswig-Holstein carbon neutral, one ferry at a time. The carbon neutral Missunde 3 cost 3.3 million euros, and she was finally delivered after various delays in January of 2024. Unlike her filthy, noisy predecessor, the Missunde 3 has a glorious roof to carry her precious solar panels aloft. Authorities quietly sold the outmoded and embarrassing Missunde 2 for 17,000 euros to some dim person who failed to grasp that diesel ferries are not the way of the future, and the buyer perhaps regretted this purchase because he left the poor boat moored in Maschholm near the head of the Schlei, where she began to decay in the elements. Such is the necessary, if cruel, fate of technologically unadvanced and environmentally unfriendly watercraft. So they've sold the old diesel ferry for 17,000 euros and it is now falling into disrepair. Strangely, however, the article continues, all was not well at the ferry crossing. It turns out that Missunde 3's glorious solar roof acted like a great sail in the face of those stiff northern winds, and her small electric motors had trouble overcoming the force, such that she took twice as long to cross the Schlei against the wind as her drab and dirty, older, diesel-powered sister that we know is now falling into disrepair after being sold for 17,000 euros. The Missunde 3's greater weight also placed too much strain on her guidance cables, and she had trouble mooring at the dock. Cables can be changed, but the mooring problems were far graver. The chubby Missunde 3 would require additional dolphins to be driven into the Schlei. These are basically the support beams that hold the ship in place. Alas, ramming sticks into the bed of a fjord that also happens to be the centre of a nature reserve is not exactly environmentally friendly. You have to do soil assessments, you have to apply for permits, it's not certain you'll be granted these permits, and all of this, anyway, takes a long time. Thus, the sun-powered Missunde 3 languished in harbour while people argued about how much environmental harm they should be allowed to inflict on the inlet to make her steerable. All the while, the automobiles, and I assume bicycles, that normally would have ridden the ferry across the Schlei had to take lengthy detours approaching 30 kilometres to the nearest bridge. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelette, and sometimes you have to increase carbon emissions while you wait for somebody to make your emissions-free ferry work. In March, after months of no ferry and pointless 30-kilometre detours, the mayor of Broadspeed Goloft, Joschka Boomen, had had enough. He demanded that authorities recommission the outmoded Missunde 2 and resume ferry service, recommissioning the ferry that you'll recall was sold for €17,000 and is now falling into disrepair. The Office for Coastal Protection objected that they had already sold Missunde 2, and also that to make her seaworthy again would require renovations of a further €1.8 million. Now it is September, and Missunde 3 is no closer to ferrying automobiles across the Schlei than she was in March. Among other things, engineers have decided that she'll have to be outfitted with additional bow thrusters to deal with the stiff currents. Thus, the Office for Coastal Protection finally went limping back to the not-so-dim buyer who purchased the diesel-powered Missunde 2 for €17,000 and struck a deal to buy it back from him for €100,000. The Missunde 2 has been given a new permit to sail until 2028 because nobody believes that the hyper-advanced, super-silent Missunde 3 will be up to the simple task of ferrying automobiles across 100 metres of water anytime soon. Thank you very much for sending that to me. Hopefully my pronunciations weren't too painful. I'm not completely sure what that blog is that it came from, but there's a link in the description. I thoroughly enjoyed reading that. That gave us a laugh. Couple of comments. Easy money to be made on arbitrage investment strategy here. Buy a banned old diesel equipment like the Missunde 2 and then sell it back to idiot Eurocrats for 5 times profit in a year when they realise their new sustainable gear doesn't work. Call it ESG. Eurocrat shithead government. I'm off to go and buy some diesel buses. I'll be parking them on an airport and selling them back to local councils for 5 times the price in a year's time. Thank you very much for watching this video.